Hey, Rising Church, welcome to another round of Groves. Hopefully, you've kicked things off with a lively discussion so far. This week, we're going to be unpacking the reading you did this past week, which was chapters 41 through 48, before we kind of move into 49 through 56 and get to some pretty exciting things, as we're going to talk about in a second here. But in this past week, you've hopefully seen, as we've kind of tied in with what we've been talking about on Sunday mornings, how Isaiah is kind of speaking towards this future generation who's actually going to listen to him and take what he says to heart, because the current generation, they're not having any of it. And so he's kind of like sealing it away in a bit for a generation that will listen. And that generation is going to come in the form of this new generation of Jews that are born in captivity in Babylon. And so it kind of shifts direction as he begins talking about this Babylonian captivity and trying to reassure them that their God, Yahweh, knows what's going on, and their God Yahweh can control circumstances, and their God Yahweh will deliver them out of captivity. And so, as we've been talking about on Sunday morning, like, it's almost this idea that God is challenging. He's challenging the gods of Babylon. He's challenging all these foreign and gods and idols and all these other ideas of who God is. And he says, if you kind of noticed at one point as you're reading this week, where over and over and over again, I think it's actually 7 to 10 times, he's like, look, I am the Lord. There is no other. Like, there's no other. I am God. There is no other God. Which for them, in their culture and their time and their circumstance, there was all kinds of gods. The Babylonians and every other nation around them and all these other empires were polytheistic. And so they worshiped all kinds of gods. And God's like, look, those are all false. And you probably even read in there where he almost starts mocking them. He starts talking about how, hey, yeah, you get a piece of wood and you take some of it and you use it to throw it on the fire to keep yourself warm, and you use some of it to cook your food and cook your dinner and bake some bread. And then you're like, you know what should I do with the rest of this wood? And you're like, you know what, I'm going to make an idol and I'm going to carve it, and then I'm going to bow down to this thing and worship it. And he's like, that does nobody even think about this? That doesn't make any sense. Like, that just is illogical. Your God is so powerful that you have to like nail it down so it doesn't topple over. He's kind of mocking them a little bit, and it kind of ties into what we talked about a couple Sundays ago, where if you kind of look at history, the historical record, God does prove that he's the last God standing. You have all these gods of Babylon. Does anybody still worship these gods? Anybody even know their names? You got all these gods of Greece and Rome and Assyria and Canaan and Egypt. And does anybody? Let me just share some with you. Anybody heard of Marduk, Tiamat, Ehana, Enkel, Apsu, Nabu, Anu, Enki, Bel, Nebo? Those are the gods of Babylon. Anybody they still standing? They still going? How about Assyria's got a lot of the same ones? Asher, Marduk, Utu, Egypt, Adam, Shu, Tefnut, Geb, Nut, Osiris, Isis, Set, Nephthys. Anybody? Any takers? Anybody following these gods anymore? Aphrodite, Poseidon, Zeus, Dionysus, Apollo, Hermes, Artemis, Athena, Ares, Hades. Any takers? Any of these people? Anybody still worshiping these gods? Baal, Anat, Asherah, Dagon, these are the gods of Canaan, Moloch, Elion, Yarek, Hadad. I mean, you could just go on and on and on and on. I'm talking hundreds. And he's like, look, I alone am God, and there is no other. He just wants them to understand that, because they need that assurance. They need that assurance that their God is kind of the whole, like, my dad's bigger than your dad. It's that kind of idea. Like, your God is the one true God. All these others are false. So if I tell you something, it's going to happen. If I give you a promise, you can bank on it. You can trust it. You can have hope, and you can have assurance, and you can stand solid, because I am God, and there is no other. There's nobody like me. There's none even come close. These are all false, and I'm the real deal. And that's kind of what we talked about with prophecy a couple weeks ago. He's like, I'm the only one that can tell you what's going to happen. None of these other gods can do that. Only I can. And when I do, then you're going to know, no, this is the real one. This is the legit one. And it kind of culminates, and there's lots of stuff you're going to talk about. But one of my favorite passages here in the section that we read this week is Isaiah chapter 45, verse 9. And he says this: Woe to those who quarrel with their maker, those who are nothing but potsherds among the potsherds on the ground. Does the clay say to the potter, what are you making? What are you doing? Does your work say, the potter has no hands, doesn't even know what he's doing? Woe to the one who says to a father, what have you begotten? Or to a mother, what have you brought to birth? It's kind of this idea, and we've talked about this multiple times, this idea that we kind of look at God and we say, you know what, God, I'm the potter and you're the clay, and I'm going to make you into what I want you to be, which is what idol worship is. You're taking some of your wood and I take some metal and I'm going to create my own God. That's kind of the old fashioned version of that, the ancient version of that. But today we do the same thing. People do that. And he's saying, look, woe to those who are arguing, fighting with their maker, with their creator, with the God of the universe, the one true God. And we're like, well, I just disagree with you and I want to do this way. And they're arguing and they're quarreling with him because he's basically saying, you're like really the honest, it's like you're a bunch of pot shards on the ground amongst pot shards. And I know for us, maybe we don't understand what that means, but if you ever come to me with Israel, again, we're going in a year. We have a meeting on this Tuesday if you're watching this on Sunday. But everywhere you go, I've been 10 times. And to this day, every single time I go, there's just pot shards. In all these ancient ruins, everywhere you go, if you look, there's just pot shards, pieces of pottery, pieces of old plates and cups and bowls, and they're just pot shards. And I don't care how many you pick up, there's always more. They're just everywhere. And he's like, that's what it is. All these false gods, like you're pot shards. Like you're not even complete. You're incomplete. You're not whole. But how can you tell me, the creator of everything, the universe, the one who holds the waters of the earth, like in the whole of his hand here, who measures the breadth of the universe with his hand, like, who are you to tell me? And I think it's this idea that I think so many people are quarreling with God. Maybe we are, or maybe you have quarreling with God. And it's the idea that you don't create God, you discover God. God reveals himself to us, and that's how we can know who he is. And that's why scripture is so important, because it's how God reveals himself to us, how he reveals his character, how he reveals his heart. And the same was true back for these exiles, these Jewish exiles in Babylon, where they needed to know that God was with them and that God saw them and that God was aware and that God is sovereign and that God will deliver on his promises, and therefore they can have peace. Even in the midst of what's going on, knowing that God will deliver, because that's who God is as he's revealed himself. And so I just think some of the stuff, hopefully it will kind of start stirring in and kind of like elevating God and lowering all the ideas of what man says God is and going, well, what does God tell us about who he is, which is what we discover in Isaiah. So hopefully that's a little bit to help you as you move into this next week. You're going to be reading more and more and more about how God's going to start revealing more and more clues and more prophecies specifically about this coming deliverer, Messiah. And you're really going to get it when you get to chapters 52 and 53. But throughout the whole thing, he's just making these prophecies and kind of helping them understand, even though they don't understand when they read it, but they will looking back on, oh, this is what God said. The Messiah is going to suffer on our behalf, is going to pay our iniquities and pay for our debts. He's the one that's going to deliver us out of captivity. So hopefully some of this stuff will connect and make sense to you, but we will dive into it in your groups, and then we will check back in with you next week.